I told myself this birthday would be different. I had whispered it into the quiet corners of my apartment while wrapping the gifts late at night, careful not to wake my son. I told myself that families changed, that people softened with time, that maybe, just maybe, this year my family would see him the way I did. Not as an inconvenience. Not as a reminder of my mistakes. But as a child who deserved joy. My son had been counting the days on his fingers. Every morning he asked, "Is today my birthday?" And every morning I watched his hope grow bigger than the small kitchen we shared. I wanted him to have what I never did, laughter that didn't come with conditions, love that didn't need permission. So I planned the party anyway, even though my chest felt tight the moment I sent the invitations. My parents' house looked the same when we arrived. Same white walls. Same heavy furniture that felt more like witnesses than comfort. The air smelled like sugar and tension. My sister was already there, seated like she owned the room, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up when my son ran inside, shouting her name with pure excitement. I should have known then. The cake sat in the center of the table, blue frosting slightly uneven because I'd made it myself. Store-bought would have been easier, but I wanted effort to mean something. Balloons bumped gently against the ceiling. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe this really could be enough. When it was time for the gifts, my son sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes shining. The room gathered around him, half interested, half distracted. Each time he opened a present, he gasped as if it were the best thing he had ever seen. A toy car. A puzzle. A small robot that beeped when you pressed its chest. He said thank you after every gift, his voice proud and careful, like he knew gratitude mattered here. Then my sister stood up. At first, she smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp. She made a comment about the toys being cheap, laughed, and before anyone could react, she grabbed the robot from my son's hands and slammed it against the table. Plastic cracked. My son froze. Another toy followed. Then another. Wrapping paper flew like confetti at a funeral. And people laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly. But enough. Enough to let it continue. Enough to tell my son this was entertainment. Enough to tell me, once again, that I was alone. My son's lip trembled. He didn't cry right away, he just looked at me, confused, like he was waiting for me to explain the joke he didn't understand. I stood there, my body locked between rage and habit. Years of being told to stay quiet pressed down on my chest. Years of being the one who ruined the mood if I spoke. My mother said nothing. My father stared at the floor. My sister bowed dramatically, soaking in the attention. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but completely. I realized this party had never been about my son. It was about power. About reminding me of my place. About teaching my child, the same way they taught me, that love could be taken away at any moment. I stepped toward my son, kneeling in front of him, brushing frosting off his sleeve with shaking hands. I whispered, "I'm here." But even as I said it, I knew this was only the beginning. Because some betrayals don't end with broken toys. They end families. The room didn't settle after the laughter faded. It thickened. Like the air had learned how to hold a grudge. I stayed on my knees beside my son, my hand resting on his small back, feeling his breath come out in uneven pulls. I wanted to scoop him up and leave, but my legs wouldn't move yet. They never did when my family turned cruel. Old instincts told me to wait. To survive the moment before daring to escape it. My sister dropped back into her chair as if she'd done something impressive. She picked at her nails, smirking, already bored with the damage she'd caused. Someone muttered, "Kids are too sensitive these days," and a few heads nodded, relieved to have an excuse not to care. That's when I stood up. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't loud, but it didn't shake. "You didn't have to do that," I said, looking straight at my sister. "Those were his gifts." She rolled her eyes. "Relax. It's just toys. Just toys." Just feelings. Just another moment they expected me to swallow whole. My mother finally spoke, her tone sharp with embarrassment. Why are you making a scene? It was meant to be funny. Funny. I felt the familiar heat climb my neck, the old urge to apologize for existing. But when I looked down at my son, his eyes red, his hands clenched around the one toy that had survived, I felt something shift. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. It wasn't funny to him, I said. That's when my father moved. He'd been silent all evening, shrinking into the furniture the way he always did when conflict appeared. I'd spent most of my life believing his silence meant neutrality. I was wrong. Silence was a choice. And tonight, he finally made a different one. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, as if he were afraid of shattering something fragile. Without saying a word, he reached for his wedding ring. The gold band caught the light for a second before he slid it off his finger. The room stilled. When he placed the ring on the table, the sound it made was small, but it echoed. I watched my mother's face drain of color. My sister laughed at first, sharp and disbelieving. "What are you doing?" she asked. My father looked tired. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just worn down by years of pretending this family wasn't broken. Then he said the 4 words. They weren't shouted. They weren't poetic. They were simple, final, and heavy enough to crush the room. 4 words that told the truth no one wanted to hear. 4 words that admitted what he had allowed, what he had ignored, and what he could no longer be part of. My mother gasped like she'd been struck. "You don't mean that," she said, reaching for the ring. He didn't stop her, but he didn't put it back on either. My sister stood abruptly, fury replacing amusement. "You're choosing her?" she snapped, pointing at me like I was a disease. My father looked at my son. Then at me. His eyes softened with something that looked like regret. "I'm choosing what's right," he said. For the first time in my life, someone in that room didn't ask me to be smaller. Didn't ask me to forgive too quickly. Didn't laugh while my child cried. The party was over. Not officially, no one said it out loud, but the illusion had collapsed. The broken toys on the floor felt like evidence now. Proof of something rotten that could no longer be hidden. I took my son's hand. And as we stood there, surrounded by the ruins of cake, laughter, and lies, I knew this moment would divide our family into a before and an after. And nothing would ever go back to the way it was. No one stopped us when I reached for my coat. That silence felt different from the others. It wasn't passive or careless, it was stunned. Like everyone was waiting for someone else to fix what had already gone too far. My son clung to my hand, his small fingers cold, his eyes darting back toward the living room as if he expected another explosion. "Come on," I whispered, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "We're going home." Behind us, voices finally rose. My mother cried out my name, her voice breaking in a way meant to pull me back into my old role. My sister started shouting, words tumbling over each other, accusations, insults, half-truths thrown like stones. Someone said, "This is getting ridiculous." Someone else said, "She's always been dramatic." I didn't turn around. For once, I let them talk without listening. The door closed behind us with a soft click, nothing dramatic enough to match the moment. Outside, the air was cold and clean, cutting through the heaviness that had wrapped itself around my chest all evening. My son took a deep breath, like he'd been holding it in for hours. In the car, he finally spoke. "Did I do something wrong?" That question broke me more than the laughter ever could have. I pulled over before I answered. I turned toward him, cupping his face gently, making sure he could see me. "No," I said, steady and certain. "You did nothing wrong. None of this was your fault." He nodded, but I could see doubt flicker behind his eyes. I recognized it immediately, it was the same doubt I'd carried my whole life. The kind that grows when adults refuse to protect you. That night, after I tucked him into bed, I sat on the floor beside his room and cried silently. Not loud, not messy, just enough to let the pain pass through me instead of burying itself deeper. I cried for the toys on the floor, for the birthday that would always be remembered for the wrong reasons, and for the girl I used to be, the one who learned too early that love could be conditional. The next morning, messages flooded in. My mother sent long paragraphs about family, forgiveness, and not tearing everyone apart over one mistake. My sister sent nothing at first, then a single text accusing me of poisoning my father against them. Relatives chimed in with advice I hadn't asked for, urging me to be the bigger person, as if being bigger meant being quieter. I didn't respond. That was new for me. Silence had always been something done to me, not something I chose. But this silence was different. It was intentional. Protective. Days turned into weeks. I returned the broken toys and replaced what I could. We baked cupcakes together, just the two of us, and sang the birthday song again, off-key, laughing, frosting everywhere. It wasn't grand. It wasn't shared online. But it was safe. And in that safety, something else happened. My absence became noticeable. My father called one evening. His voice was hesitant, unsure of his place. He didn't defend himself. He didn't excuse anyone. He simply said, "I should have protected you sooner." I didn't forgive him right away. But I listened. Because walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I stopped begging to be treated like family, and started acting like one to the child who needed me most. The strangest thing about leaving is how quiet life becomes afterward. No sudden fights. No waiting for the next insult disguised as a joke. Just space, open, unfamiliar, and slowly healing. I used to think revenge had to be loud to be satisfying. I was wrong. The sweetest kind barely makes a sound. Weeks passed, then months. My son stopped flinching when people laughed too loudly. He stopped asking if his toys would be taken away. His smiles came easier, lighter, as if his body had finally learned it was safe to relax. Watching that change felt like winning something I had fought my whole life for without realizing it. My family, on the other hand, unraveled without me. My sister struggled without an audience. She tried to rewrite the story, telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable, dramatic, ungrateful. But without me there to react, her words lost their power. People began to notice patterns they'd ignored for years. Jokes stopped landing. Invitations grew awkward. The laughter she lived on dried up. My mother reached out often at first. Guilt dressed up as concern. "You're tearing this family apart," she said more than once. I never argued. I never explained. I simply replied, "I'm protecting my son." Eventually, even she ran out of ways to argue with that. My father changed the most. He moved out quietly. No grand announcements. No public blame. He started therapy, something I never imagined he'd do. When we met for coffee one afternoon, he didn't ask to be forgiven. He looked at me and said, "I failed you when you were young. I won't fail him." That was the moment I realized the 4 words he'd said that night didn't just end a marriage. They ended a lie. The lie that peace was worth more than protection. The lie that silence was kindness. The lie that enduring cruelty made you strong. My sister never apologized. She didn't have to. Life began teaching her the lessons I no longer carried. Doors closed where they once flew open. People stopped covering for her. Consequences found her naturally, without my help. And that was my revenge. Not humiliation. Not confrontation. Not destruction. Just growth. On my son's next birthday, we didn't invite many people. We went to the park instead. A small cake. A few friends who laughed with him, not at him. When he opened his gifts, he looked up at me, eyes shining, and said, "Mom, this is the best birthday ever." In that moment, I felt something settle deep inside my chest. I hadn't just left a toxic family. I had built a better one. The kind where laughter doesn't hurt. where gifts aren't weapons. Where love doesn't have to be earned by staying quiet. And somewhere, far away from our peace, they finally understood. They didn't lose me because I was weak. They lost me because I became strong enough to walk away, and never look back.